Have you ever wondered why some laws seem to treat different groups of people differently, and how the legal system decides if that is fair? It is a complex question at the heart of our constitutional system. When government actions or laws classify people into groups, the United States Constitution's Equal Protection Clause requires courts to examine these classifications using different levels of scrutiny. These are known as rational basis scrutiny, intermediate scrutiny, and strict scrutiny. These three standards are the core tools courts use to determine if a law is constitutional. The reason we have these distinct levels is to protect fundamental individual rights while still allowing the government to function effectively. The level of scrutiny applied depends on two key factors. First, the type of classification the government is making, and second, the nature of the right being affected. For example, if a law differentiates based on race or national origin, or impacts a fundamental right like freedom of speech or the right to vote, it is subject to the highest level of review, strict scrutiny. This is because these classifications involve what are called suspect classes, or fundamental rights, where there is a high risk of discrimination or infringement on essential liberties. To pass strict scrutiny, the government must show it has a compelling governmental interest for the classification, and that the law is narrowly tailored to achieve that interest, meaning it is the least restrictive way to accomplish the goal. Laws rarely survive this level of scrutiny. Next, we have intermediate scrutiny. This level applies to classifications based on gender or legitimacy of birth. These are sometimes referred to as quasi-suspect classes. For a law to pass intermediate scrutiny, the government must demonstrate that the classification serves an important governmental interest and is substantially related to achieving that interest. This standard is less demanding than strict scrutiny but more rigorous than rational basis review. Finally, the lowest level of review is rational basis scrutiny. This applies to most other classifications that do not involve suspect classes, quasi-suspect classes, or fundamental rights. Think of laws that differentiate based on age, income, or occupational status. Under rational basis review, a law is presumed to be constitutional and will be upheld if the government can show that the classification is rationally related to a legitimate governmental interest. This is a very deferential standard, meaning courts usually give a lot of leeway to the government, and most laws easily pass this test. Understanding these levels provides insight into how courts approach legal challenges. When a court decides which level of scrutiny to apply, it essentially sets the bar for how difficult it will be for the government to defend its law. If a law treats people differently, knowing the classification it uses helps predict the legal standard it must meet. For instance, a law requiring all drivers to be at least 16 years old would only need to pass rational basis review, as age is not a suspect or quasi-suspect class and driving is not a fundamental right. The concept of tiered scrutiny emerged from landmark Supreme Court cases, notably United States versus Caroline Products Company in 1938, particularly its famous footnote 4, which suggested a higher standard for laws targeting discrete and insular minorities. This framework further solidified with cases like Craig versus Boren in 1976, which established intermediate scrutiny for gender classifications, moving beyond previous, less stringent tests. These legal doctrines ensure that while governments can classify people for various purposes, like taxation or regulation, they must provide robust justifications when those classifications touch on sensitive areas like race, gender, or fundamental rights. Ultimately, these levels of equal protection scrutiny are fundamental to upholding the promise of fairness embedded in our Constitution. They provide a structured way for the judiciary to balance the state's power to legislate with the individual's right to equal treatment, ensuring that any governmental differentiation between groups is justified by a valid public purpose and not based on arbitrary prejudice or discrimination. This analytical framework is crucial for understanding how our legal system safeguards against inequality and protects the liberties of all people.